Hey guys, Jeff here from GP Moto. I just wanted to make a new video on the new, or I should say updated National Shock from MX Tech. It's been a few years since I made the original video where I kind of disassembled or showed you guys all the internal workings of a National Shock. And since then, Jeremy has been relentlessly working on updating this shock and improving every single aspect of it that they possibly can. Him and Adam Cerny have worked hourless evenings and days on the dyno and every possible place where they could make an improvement, whether it's weight or performance or consistency, and just to improve the overall dynamic ability of the shock, whether you want to set it up and use it for off-road or motocross or arena cross or supercross, whatever the application is. This shock is extremely versatile, flexible, and can kind of cater to any of those needs. So I just thought today I would go over what it would be like when you buy your National Shock, and we'll just unpackage it or unbox it and kind of go through the whole thing. We're going to disassemble it all, and I'm going to show you what makes it tick. So this is typically how your box would come from MX Tech, or if you don't buy from MX Tech, if you buy from an authorized dealer like myself, then I would do the same thing. I would get this shock from Jeremy, make any internal valving changes that I feel be necessary to cater to your needs the best, and then box it all back up and send it back to you. So this is how you're gonna get it. So when we open up the box, it may seem like a bit of overkill for a shock, but this is arguably the best shock on the market. So this is what you get. Everything's foam lined, foam packed. The shock as it comes, like I said, whether it's from me or from Jeremy, it's 100% ready to go. Clickers are all set with your base settings. Spring for your weight and your riding style is installed. Preload's installed. Everything about this shock is literally ready to bolt in your bike and go. So we're going to be going over all of that in a second, but also what I just want to add that's really nice that comes in this kit. Jeremy includes titanium shock bolts, upper and lower shock bolts, as well as a 4mm ball end screwdriver, because all of the adjustments on all MX Tech components are 4mm Allen, whether that's Lucky cartridges or Ravens or a National Shock, it doesn't matter. They all use a 4mm Allen for compression, rebound, any adjustment you need to make on the shock, whether it's high speed, low speed, mid speed, any of it. Also in the box, what you're gonna get is a bunch of literature that shows internal settings on the shock, show all your shim stacks, as well as a tuning guide for the National Shock. This is gonna run you through everything in here. Steve and the guys did a great job organizing and laying out everything from spring preload and setting sag, understanding all your adjusters, what each adjuster does for you, and how to adjust it based on what inputs you're getting from the bike, whether you need more low-speed compression or high-speed compression. Yeah, everything's in there. So really good, ton of information. Oh yeah, and also, like I said, there's a quick setup card here that'll tell you where your base settings are at for low speed, mid speed, high speed compression, how much free sag you want, how much race sag you want, and then depending on if you get forks as well, it'll have spring rate and all the settings on your fork as well. So on the back of this, there's also a quick setting or quick tuning guide on what to adjust if you're getting harshness or kick or squat or whatever. So really cool package. Everything in here is very well thought out and very professional. So let's take this thing apart and see what makes it tick. Okay, so I've got this shock out of the box and I've brought it over here to the bench, to the vise, and we are going to take this thing apart. So I'll quickly run you through disassembly on this shock. Like pretty much any shock absorber, it's pretty straightforward. Everything on here is super nice. All the adjusters are all CNC billet aluminum. Everything spins and moves effortlessly. It's just, everything's so beautifully made on the shock. So we'll take this spring off first, and that way we can disassemble the shock. So on the National shock, it's like a lot of other WP or Japanese shocks. All you do is just loosen all the preload off the spring. So the spring is loose on here. This lower collar, you just slide it down. There's a little snap ring that comes off. Easy. Spring comes off. Now, on Jeremy's shocks, the dust caps threads into the seal head assembly. So it doesn't just hammer in and stay in there with friction the way that other shock manufacturers do. So I don't know if you can see it or not, but there's a tiny little set screw on there that just locks everything into place on the National shock. So everything's really well machined and really nice. I can't stress that enough. So we just undo that little set screw, and then we can undo the dust cap off of there. So I've just got a little Allen key that I rounded off a little bit that just fits nicely inside these holes. There's holes machined in the dust cap, and we can get this dust cap to come off. It just unthreads, and there you go. All of Jeremy's shocks, all the National shocks use SKF seal head assemblies. They're all custom made for the National shocks. As you can see in there, there's SKF oil and dust seals in there. So really nice touch. Everything about this shock is amazing. The fit and finish of everything is just, it's so beautiful. MX Tech also uses a small rubber plug in the reservoir to hold the nitrogen in. So we just use a needle and we can pierce the plug and let all the nitrogen out. And that's going to allow us to take the seal head out so we can disassemble this beast. Once all the nitrogen's out, we can push the seal head down, take snap ring out, and take the shaft assembly out. Actually, before I do that, to make our lives easier, once all the nitrogen's out on this shock, we're going to use the vacuum pump, and we're just going to suck all the oil out of here real quick so that we can load that into the vacuum pump machine, and we can use it to recharge the shock after we're done making our changes. So I'll just take this service port out, 4mm Allen key, put our fitting in that we got from shockbleeder.com for the National shock, hook up our vacuum pump, let's suck this baby out. I'm going to pull that needle out because we're done with letting the nitrogen out. There we go. At that point, we're all done sucking all the oil out real quick. I mean, not all of it's out, but most of it's out. Enough that when we disassemble it, it's not going to make a huge mess. I'm just going to put this service port back in here so that residual oil is not constantly dripping out of that hole while we're working on it. Whoops. Mazel tov. Okay, so I've got our empty shock body over here. I've got the shaft out, as you can see. And what I'm going to do is take these compression adjusters out so we can have a look at what make them tick. So I'm just going to throw this in the suspension vise here real quick. And then all we need is a 17mm socket. We can take this high-speed compression adjuster assembly out. And a 12mm wrench. We can take our low and mid-speed compression adjuster out. Now, we've got our compression adjuster spring in here. And okay. So I've kind of got these pieces laid out on the bench here. This is our high-speed compression adjuster. And what that does is as we thread that red Allen in, it will extend this piece here up away from it. So that's going to increase force or pressure on this spring. That spring rides on this side of this piston, which, if I can hold this with one hand here. So this spring rides on this cup, like so. And that cup puts pressure on our shim stack. So this is a regular, we got a 6-port piston. And as you can see there, there's all our shims in our shim stack. So how this high-speed compression adjuster works is as force increases, it overcomes the pressure or the force needed to open up this shim stack, as well as lift this cup and spring off the shim stack. It all bends open and allows these ports to be opened up, and then you can have oil flow from the main body of the shock into the reservoir. Same kind of idea here with our compression assembly. We've got low speed compression and mid speed compression. Our low speed adjuster is basically an adjustable orifice. We basically just have a hole in the center of the assembly. So oil is allowed to flow through the center, bypass the piston and shim stack, and allow it to flow around and out and into the reservoir. So that's how our low speed adjuster works. And then our mid-speed compression adjuster is basically a subvalve type assembly. So for those of you that aren't overly familiar with what a subvalve is, let me just pull out another piece here for you. This is the base valve holder for a Lucky cartridge. So what happens is your main piston and shim stack goes on the shaft right here. And where your low speed adjuster is, this shaft is hollow in the center. Oil will go through the center of the shaft, bypass your piston and shim stack, and come out those 4 holes in the bottom there. Now, if you have a subvalve assembly, what we do is we put a shim stack on top of those 4 holes, and that will restrict oil flow through the adjuster, what goes in the center of the shaft and around the shim stack. So that is what we would call a subvalve. It's underneath the main piston and valve assembly. So that's kind of how this compression adjuster works. If I can here, I'll try and quickly take this apart for you. See what size wrench we need. There we go. So that's the beauty I love about these National shocks, is how tunable everything is. If you don't like how something's working, you can totally disassemble it, change your shim stacks around. We can make it stiffer, softer. You can have your National shock in a KTM 300XC and then decide that I don't want to ride off-road anymore, I want to race motocross with it. So then you put it in your 250 SXF. And you don't need to buy a new shock. We just can change all these settings around internally on these adjusters and set it up for motocross. So what we've got here is where this piston and shim stack resides. This is basically like a base valve holder. So hard to see because everything's wet and covered in oil, but there's a small hole right there. And that's where our oil comes into the bottom of this shim stack. And it will bend those shims open and allow oil to flow through this adjuster. That's our mid-speed compression adjustment. So the adjustment allows how much oil is allowed to flow through that hole and bend the shims open. So we can either have it wide open so that it's just the shims that's creating the restriction or the damping, or we can meter that hole a little bit and restrict the flow to that shim stack. So the whole principle and whole theory on this shock is about pressure balance. That's what Jeremy and Adam have done, why they've changed these adjusters around. As soon as you change a setting on one of these adjusters, it will have an impact on the other one. So if you have more low-speed compression, if you tighten your low-speed compression damper, it'll put more force, it'll bleed less oil through the low speed bleed, and it'll put more force on the mid-speed circuit. And it will have more of a profound effect on the shim stack on your mid-speed, and vice versa also. If you increase the amount of damping, so you tighten your mid-speed adjuster, that's going to put more oil flow into your high-speed circuit because less oil is being allowed to bypass through the mid-speed circuit, and it'll get forced through the high-speed circuit. Of course, all this is velocity dependent on what obstacle you hit, how much shaft velocity we have with the shock. But in general, that's kind of how it works. So if we make this high-speed circuit too soft, it will open prematurely to how much flow we could have had through the mid-speed adjuster. So it really is a balancing act about ensuring that low speed, mid speed, and high speed all kind of work together and all have the correct settings in them so that it's kind of a seamless transition from one circuit to the other. It's kind of like a carburetor, how we have a pilot jet, a needle, and a main jet. You don't run one obscenely rich or lean in contradiction to the other. You try to make sure that everything's balanced and you have the correct air fuel ratio and your quarter throttle, half throttle, and full throttle, so you don't get any bogs or hesitations. And it's the same kind of ideology here with this National shock. So there's so much adjustability and tunability here. And the reason why Jeremy and Adam went to this new design was it gave them the ability to control that oil flow better across all of the range that they were seeing for different shaft velocities and different pressure differentials that are created in the shock. So really good job here. Again, there's nothing super restrictive. All the piston designs are really good. All their spring pressures are awesome. We see some adjusters. It's a similar style in some KYB adjusters, but yet their compression spring is obscenely stiff, and it would take an obscene amount of force to open it. So it tends to have a lot of harshness on high-speed bumps, but Jeremy has different pressure springs. We can change shim stacks. We can change everything to make this shock as plush or as stiff as we need it to be. So jumping away from that for a second, let's go over here to the main shaft and main piston and shim stack. So on this assembly here now, this is where our huck valve lives. I'm just gonna throw this in the vise so that we can free up a hand here. Okay, so this is our huck valve piston. So this piston drops into a cup that's in the top of the shock, and we get a huge increase in compression damping in that last couple inches of stroke of the shock here. So that's the MX Tech huck valve. So that whole assembly up there is also tunable. On the bottom here, you can see that there's shim stacks in there, and we can tune how aggressive that huck valve is, or we could have it not aggressive at all. It's totally whatever the user wants. Our main piston, we have our rebound shim stack here and our compression shim stack on the bottom. And like I said earlier, the guys at MX Tech run all SKF seal products in the National shock. So really nice seal head assembly. And flip this around. Like I said earlier, also 4mm adjuster on the rebound. And that's a needle and a metered orifice to change oil flow through the huck valve, through the center of the shaft of the shock. Allows it on the rebound stroke that it will bypass the rebound damping and allow oil to flow around it. I do believe, if I'm not mistaken, that they run a check valve on the huck. So on a National shock, no oil flows through the rebound circuit on the compression stroke. So you get independent rebound adjustment as well as low speed, mid speed, and high speed compression adjustment with this shock. So everything's really awesome. When you buy a shock from me at GP Moto, I've spent an obscene amount of time testing and riding this shock and trying to come up with settings for this shock that work the best for off-road. I've got a bunch of experience setting it up for motocross and arena cross also. What else? Oh, one more thing that's super cool. In this shock, let me set this camera down for a second. Just put her down over here. In the National shock, I won't be able to get it out right now. Oh yeah, I can. Man, these things slide so effortlessly. It always blows my mind. So this is the free piston in the shock. So Jeremy, again, has worked with SKF, and they've developed a new free piston design for the National shock that is unlike anything else I've ever seen on the market. So we get the super, super low friction qualities of SKF seals. This thing has like zero friction. It just moves in there effortlessly. Again, if you took, say, like the old style piston out of an old WP shock, I think these are 52 mil. I can't remember exactly. But if you had that in the reservoir, there's no way I could grab it with my fingers and pull it out of the reservoir. There's just too much stiction and friction on this O-ring and the anodizing of the reservoir. This one with the Kashima coating on the reservoir and the SKF seal material, I mean, I just grabbed that with my fingers and just pulled it out effortlessly. It just floated right up. So you get zero delay or resistance when your shock's changing direction from compression or rebound. The other thing too is with this, you can see where the gray is on the inside. That's kind of the metal body that gives the support to the piston. But in the center, I don't know if you guys can see it in the video or not, but it's just rubber. It's flexible. It's almost like a drum head, right? So when the oil acts on it in small shaft movements, when you're going over little stutter bumps and chatter, the entire piston doesn't have to physically move through the stroke. It's kind of like a floating piston and a bladder all in one. So there's flexibility to this membrane. In the center, like I said, almost like a drum skin, as well as the entire body moves up and down. We have larger shaft movements. We need to displace more oil out of the main body. Really, really cool piece. A bit of a pain in the ass for dealers to bleed it. We have a bunch of special tooling to ensure that the piston stays in the correct portion of the stroke when we bleed the shock. But as Jeremy's mentioned in the past, MX Tech is like mega performance driven. If something becomes a pain in the butt for dealers to do, but it adds a huge advantage to the product, we don't really care, because at the end of the day, we just want you to have the best end product and how it performs for you. So if you guys got any questions about National shocks, how they work, what they do, what they can do for you, what bikes they fit, you can go to mxtech.com And there's a lot of information on their website there. Don't hesitate to reach out to dealers as well. I can't remember if Jeremy's got a dealer locator on the website, but if you call MX Tech, tell them where you live. Diane or Jeremy or Adam or anybody, whoever answers the phone at MX Tech, great people. They'd be more than happy to guide you guys to your local dealer, at which point you can, you know, tee up a shock for your bike and get it set up specifically for you if that's something you want. Or, like I said, the settings that Jeremy has out of the box, they have off-road settings and they have motocross settings that come in the shock right out of the box. So really good settings also. I just believe sometimes that an individual setup for the terrain and the type of riding that you do in your local riding area is going to yield you the best results that are possible. So dealers, we can valve them. Jeremy can valve it. Anybody can get it set up for you. But yeah, this is the latest, greatest 2023 National Shock from MX Tech. And hope you guys enjoyed what you saw.